So good morning and welcome to the first of the book talks. This is more in-house than you think, because right from the very first edition of the Pondi Lit Fest, in our delegated works, Nandini and I used to sit and create the book talks and the book lists in our own little corner, so that this aspect of the Lit Fest was always present. So Nandini, so good to have you. Never imagined this sort of a session would ever happen.
I'm so glad, and this is pure grace, nothing else. It's just pure grace.
I'm so happy to see you here. So Nandini, I think taking off from the previous session, my first question to you would be this. You have written a historical fiction account, a trilogy, in fact, of the Gupta series. And then today with Rani Durgawati, it's your first non-fiction. So taking off from what Vikram and Anand just said in the previous session, how much of fiction do you allow, and what is the category? How do you decide that these elements will not deviate from the truth? How do you make the distinction when you write your non-fiction?
So thanks, Alo. Actually, that was a brilliant discussion. But the point I'm going to make here is that historical fiction actually can be a bit of a minefield. The reason why is when you are mixing fact and fiction, the reader can, and often does, get confused and accept the fiction for fact. I'll give an example. Those of you who read Bangla in this audience, you will know about a very famous book called Shei Shomoy, written by Sunil Gangopadhyay. So an award-winning book on Kaliprashanna Singho, who's a historical figure. Now, in that book, Sunil Gangopadhyay seems to suggest that Kaliprashanna Singho was actually an illegitimate child. There is no historical account for that. But because the book became a cult book, this particular element, of course, the book is brilliant and it encompasses many, many historical characters, including Michael Madhusudan Datta and others. But people have picked on this, and this has become a pernicious thing that they accept to be true. This is very dangerous. This is something that historical fiction does suffer from. In the case of the Guptas, for instance, I made it very clear in the foreword that these are the aspects of the story which are historically true. And I also made it very clear where I have deviated from history when it comes to a historical personage. If it is a fictional personage, you can do whatever, that person can hang from the ceilings, doesn't really matter. But if I'm talking about Samudragupta, if I'm talking about Chandragupta Vikramaditya, these are historical characters. And I have woven in fiction, but I've made it very clear in the introduction that these elements are fictional. Do not take it as true.
Thank you, because ever since that particular session was decided upon, I'll say if I have a non-fiction and a fiction writer sitting with me, this is the first question I'll ask. Okay, moving on to your non-fiction book, Rani Durgawati. I will give my impressions later, but to start with, I'm so happy you came up with this, because these are the forgotten legends and heroes that we could well do with. So first of all, congratulations on a very well-written book. It's written with, it's non-fiction, so she has sourced herself from sources that are dependable, but the writing style is very fast-moving. So it reads very, very fast and very, very well. So that's, congratulations for that. So my first question to you would be, there are three ways in which we can divide this particular book. One is when the kingdom prospered. Gondwana prospered. You can situate it for us. And then you have a particular decline that takes place when the Mughals came. And then you have the decimation of the space when the British came. So this could be a way by which we could divide the account. So to begin with, can you situate the kingdom? And can you give us the sources of prosperity and what that space was? Second to, I think, which is the other empire, which is just bigger. It was among the second or the third biggest empire.
After Vijayanagar.
Yeah, after Vijayanagar. So can you just situate that for us? Then we'll take it from there.
Okay, so Rani Durgawati was a tribal queen of central India. Her kingdom encompassed what in current day would be the districts of Jabalpur, Dindori, Damo, Hoshangabad, Narsinghpur, and all that surrounding areas. So this is a very beautiful, very untouched part in the heart of India, washed by the holy Narmada. Now, Rani Durgawati herself was not Gond. She was a Rajput princess. So the reason why I was so astonished, and I'm quite, I totally agree with Vikramji, who talked about being in love with the subject you're a biographer of. I am totally in awe of Rani Durgawati because she is such a fantastic example of how you can break the rules even without breaking the rules. And she is a thoroughly modern medieval monarch. And so she was a Rajput. She marries in an intercaste marriage, and we are talking 16th century here. She marries a tribal Gond prince. And when he passes away, from all accounts, they have a very successful, very happy marriage. He passes away rather sooner. And at that point, again, she pushes the envelope because she has a very grudging brother-in-law lurking in the background, who of course has very interesting ideas of running the kingdom himself with her little minor child as the puppet king. But she fobs him off so well that for the next 15 years, as long as she is alive and on the throne, he never sets foot in Gara, like ever. So and over the next 15 years, she fobs off 51 skirmishes from her, jealous neighbors. And of course, the last of that was the battle that she had with Akbar's very senior general, Asaf Khan. And the interesting point about Rani Durgawati, and this is where, we talk a little bit about the narrative. See, the thing is that when we look at our history books typically talk about big battles which we have lost. So, Battle of Panipat, Battle of Haldighati, we are losing battles. So we kind of tend to think that, we as a people, we don't win battles. The reason I love this story is because what a kick-ass woman, even the last battle, which if you go to Wikipedia, they'll say Rani Durgawati was a Gond queen who was defeated by Akbar's general Asaf Khan. End of story. But that's not her story, because even in the last battle, she actually won the first part of the battle. And for 15 years that she was on the throne, she never lost a single battle, not one. So her story is not a story about loss.
So the Gond area is essentially a highly forested area, inaccessible. The terrain itself played in favor of them being isolated and prosper. So tell us a little bit about what contributed to their prosperity and how she took care of her people. The reason why I'm telling you this is because I suppose in a session like in Pondy Lit Fest, you must understand as factually as possible the specific policies taken up by invaders and colonists who have systematically deconstructed what worked so well in our kingdoms for centuries. So tell us a little bit about where her wealth came from.
Okay, so I'll start off with the reason why Monsieur Asaf Khan, Akbar's general, wanted to attack Garha Mandala, which is Rani Durgawati's kingdom in the first place. Now you would wonder, it's a remote tribal kingdom, right? Why would Delhi be interested in them? The reason was that they were a phenomenally rich kingdom. And how do we know this? We know this because in 1908, in and around Jabalpur, a cache of coins was discovered. All right, and these coins were from all over, from Gulbarga, from Kashmir, from Gujarat, from the Deccan, including coins from Nepal. And these are all gold coins. Now, where did these coins come from? And what were they doing in the heart of India, which is like a remote, tribal, forested area? The reason that they were there is because Garha was a very important trading center. What did they trade? They traded in forest produce, of course, but they also traded in elephants, who were very important for medieval warfare. And they also were a grain bowl. So none other than Mughal hagiographer Abul Fazl himself mentions in the Akbarnama that Garha was sending grain to places like Gujarat and the Deccan. So this is a grain bowl. This is a trading post. They were selling elephants, and so they were a phenomenally rich country. And people of Garha used to pay their taxes either in forest produce and elephants or gold mohurs. We also find that the kings and queens of Garha actually minted gold coins. You have to understand this is 16th century. There weren't that many Hindu kingdoms that were minting gold coins, including the Rajputs. They used to use the Mughal coinage. But this is a kingdom that was minting gold coins, not once, not twice, but several times over a period of time. And we have numismatic evidence for that. So clearly this was a very, very rich kingdom. What happened to them when they lost their independence? This is a very important question, because what the Mughals did was, of course, first and foremost, they were lured by loot. They wanted the money. That's the reason why they invaded Garha. So they ransacked and looted the main forts of the kingdom, particularly Chauragarh Fort, or what is today known as Chaugan Killa. So Chauragarh Fort was ransacked and looted, and then the Mughal system of governance was very centralized. So what happened was that they used to appoint jagirdars, right? And these jagirdars would be constantly transferred. So over a period of 20, 25 years, Garha became a revolving door. And Mughal jagirdars came and went, succession of Mughal jagirdars came and went. Now, if you are not going to spend very much time in a place, and you know that your jagirdari is going to die with you, it's not something that you will leave behind for your family, what are you going to do? You will try and extract as much as you can from that land, so that after sending the emperor his share, you get to keep the rest for yourself. As a result of which, Garha became more and more and more impoverished. And then what happened? Then came the British. Even more interesting, because the British were the worst of the lot. They just casually decided that the Gonds of Garha, who had always lived off the forest, did not need to have any access to the forest. So when the Central Provinces was set up in 1861 under Sir Richard Temple, they just restricted access of the Gonds to the best forest lands. And if you read the book, you will see how Gond folk songs and folk tales, the desperation in those songs and tales, as they were systematically cut off from what was their traditional source of livelihood. And slowly Garha became a center of destitution and death, as famines and disease swept through the land. So this is what the Golden Gourd was reduced to.
So one of the questions that comes to mind, that even you have tried to answer in the book, is that considering the fact that there were overtures by the kingdom to show that they were not the enemies of the Mughals. It's in the time, the contemporary Mughal emperor was Akbar. Why did he choose to, why did he sanction Asaf Khan to attack Gond? So here, maybe we should spend some time in looking at Akbar a little bit more in detail, because, he's also Akbar the Great. So let's look at this great aspect a little bit. Let's give it some timelines, because I verified with Meenakshi ji also before asking you this question, because two Jauhars took place in his reign.
Yes.
One was in Gondwana and the other one was in Chittor. And so what is this eclectic religion he did it, and at what time in his rule, as opposed to actually causing two Jauhars to take place because of his attacks on two kingdoms? So can you, let's just talk a little bit about him. Let's just reposition him a little bit in history and his attitude. And especially, I think there is a little bit of a misunderstanding. Not, it's a gross misunderstanding as to his intentions to be inclusive. It was very, very tactical. It was not philosophical or spiritual. So can you just dwell on that a little bit? I think it's very important.
Thank you, Alo. So the problem with Mr. Akbar is that we have turned him into Akbar the Great, whereas he should be just Jalal. So, he is just Jalal. Because, you see, there are 2-3 things that you have to understand. Number one is that Akbar's whole Sulhi-Kul journey began in the late 1570s, by which time he had already been on the throne for more than 25 years. So he was not a tolerant and, this secular. First of all, we keep talking about Akbar being secular. I don't think as a medieval monarch he would understand secularism, even if it came and bit him on the nose. So the point is that he became an interesting ruler, and interesting for a medieval ruler. He became that towards the latter half of his reign. But for the first couple of decades of his reign, he was a very, very different person, and certainly not the great. What do I mean by that? Let's look at, and Alu has already talked about this, let's look at the two Johars that happened during Akbar's reign. The first was the Johar that happened in the fort of Chauragar after Durgawati was killed and after her son, Bir Narayan, was killed in battle. The second was, this was 1564. The second was after the Battle of Haldighati. After the Battle of Chittor, after the siege of Chittor, which was just about 3 years later. Interestingly, both these big battles, the person who's common to them is Asaf Khan, who's Akbar's general. And also we have to understand that while Asaf Khan may have been certainly, the trigger for him was loot, because like all medieval invaders, he thought that a rich kingdom ruled by a woman was low-hanging fruit. We have to understand that he would not have been able to do what he did if he did not have imperial sanction, which he did. And in fact, if you look at Akbar's policy, everywhere that he plans an invasion, he first positions a Mughal Jagirdar as close to that place as possible, and that is followed by a military mandate. That's what happened in the case of Durgawati as well. Asaf Khan became the governor of Garhakatinga, Manikpur, and then he was given the mandate to go after the Baghel Raja of Rewa, and then of course he decided that Durgawati was a low-hanging fruit, he just had to take over the kingdom. Similarly, when Akbar decided to go against the Sisodias, and in the Chittor raid, again Asaf Khan Harvi was positioned as close to Chittor as humanly possible, which was followed by a military mandate. So Akbar very clearly knew what he was doing. He wanted, for his own reasons, to annex these kingdoms. Of course, the Sisodias, he had a different reason for that, but in the case of Durgawati, I think he was driven by political exigencies, as well as the fact that he, like most medieval men, decided that why should a Hindu queen be there, ruling a very prosperous kingdom independently. She just needed to be part of the overarching Mughal ambitions in central India. And remember, at that point, Akbar had also gone and attacked other central Indian kingdoms, including Baz Bahadur, who was Malwa was right next to Durgawati's kingdom, and Baz Bahadur was Durgawati's neighbor. So Akbar had an overarching plan for central India. Durgawati was part of it. Akbar had an overarching plan for Rajputana. The Sisodias were at the center of it. So we have to look at it as part of his exigency. And as far as Akbar's being tolerant goes, is the great moniker. His journey with Sulikul and his journey with, looking at different religions and finding out more about them and all that happens much later. The earlier Akbar was a very different man. If I have your permission, I'd just like to read out a small 3-4 lines from the Fathnama-i Chittor. I just want to read it out to you, and then you can tell me whether you think it is Akbar the Great or just Jalal. Let's see. These are Akbar's own words. This is a imperial diktat, Fathnama, right? And this is what he has said after the Battle of Chittor, after the siege of Chittor. This is his own words. We spend our precious time to the best of our ability in war, or Gaza, and jihad, and with the help of eternal God, who is the supporter of our ever-increasing empire, we are busy in subjugating the localities, habitations, forts, and towns which are under the possession of the infidels, may God forsake and annihilate all of them, and thus raising the standard of Islam everywhere and removing the darkness of polytheism and violent sins by the use of the sword. We destroy the places of worship of idols in those places and other parts of India. Unquote. That's Akbar the Great for you. So what I'm saying is that his whole journey, he was certainly an unusual monarch, but the point I'm making is he was by no means the only unusual medieval monarch, and there were many, many others, Durgawati included, who were just as tolerant, which was born out of political exigency and genuine love of scholarship. But he became this tolerant and rather benevolent character many, many years later, not at the beginning.
Actually, that's a very good point she makes. I mean, we talk a lot about Akbar being accepting, but the fact is that there were many others who did the same. Why is it that we do not give those kings that space? And why is it that there is this one monarch that we keep talking about who in the latter half of his life became tolerant, quote unquote, and he is glorified in his era, whereas lots of others did it. My next question to you, Nandini, unfortunately, is the fact that you have in the title of your book, Forgotten Life. Which brings me also to the fact that you have had to use a lot, your sources are two. One are chroniclers of the time, and the other is very steeped in on what you get, the signals you get from folklore. So can you talk to us about these two sources, and what can you glean in terms of non-fiction from the songs, and also, of course, the way Abul Fazl, even being part of Akbar's court, talks about Durgawati, and what, so that we know the basis of the construct of your history.
So Rani Durgawati's story is the story of memories. Why she was remembered and she continues to be remembered, and why she was forgotten. And if we look at Rani Durgawati's stories, there are 3 or 4 sources of what we call primary information about her. The first, of course, is Abul Fazl's Akbarnama. But Abul Fazl was by no means the only Mughal chronicler who wrote about Rani Durgawati. There were others like Badauni, Ferishta, and there were several Sanskrit secular works which talk about Rani Durgawati, including the Samayalok, which is a treatise that was commissioned by Rani Durgawati during her reign and was written by Padmanabha Mishra Bhattacharya, who was a poet in her court. And there are also temple inscriptions. The Ramnagar temple inscription is a very good source of information about Rani Durgawati. There are numismatic evidences which we look at. But apart from these, what I have mined for the book are folk tales and folk songs about the Queen. And today, if you go to Jabalpur and the surrounding areas, to this day, the Gonds sing about the Rani, to this day. And the songs about her, this is why she is interesting, that Rani Durgawati died on the 24th of June, 1564. That's nearly 460 odd years ago. But for the last 5 centuries, the songs about her have remained unchanged. She is a symbol of, she's a combination of protection and piety. She is a symbol for the Gonds of deliverance. Whenever they think about their past, whenever they want to escape their present, they hark back to her rule. Pura Rajma Sona Ka Sikha. You know, that is what her rule was, a golden age. And again you find Gond folk tales and folk songs referencing the Rani. And that has remained unchanged for 5 centuries. Mind you, I want to point this out, that when it comes to actual primary sources, there can be some reasons for spin doctrine. For instance, if you look at the Ramnagar inscription, they have tried to sort of devalue the Battle of Narayanala or the Battle of Damo, because by that time, this was about 100 years after Rani Durgawati, the Gonds were then part of the Mughal Empire. They were vassal kings of the Mughals. So they did not want to piss off the reigning Mughal emperor, which was Shah Jahan. So they called Shah Jahan like Arjuna, and they call Asaf Khan is like Bhima in prowess, and that it was just a tax raid. Despite these attempts at official spin doctoring, if you go to Jabalpur to this day, popular opinion and folk tales and songs universally despise Asaf Khan and Akbar. It hasn't worked. So remember that this is a people, they are holding on to the narrative. I mean, Vikramji and Anand were just talking about the narrative. This is how they have held on to their narrative. For 5 centuries, that narrative about the Queen has not changed.
Yeah. My next question is, yeah, again, to understand her story, her success as well as her failure, and the way we govern land is federated structures. So it's very interesting that tribals were always given a certain sense of very practical autonomy, so that their life, the livelihood, the osmotic relationship they had with the forests, in the very sustainable way in which they actually exploited that resource, needed to have a certain sense of federated autonomy. Now, as far as administration is concerned, tell us how that worked. And as far as military is concerned, tell us how that worked too and how it played out in her life.
So it's interesting because if you look at the Rajgond dynasty, which is where Durgawati came from, and you look at the folk songs and folk tales of the region, Garha and surrounding areas, you will find that over centuries, they deify or they sing praises of their kings and queens. Of course, Rani Durgawati has been turned into a goddess, but even others. And it is the outsiders who are looked at as enemies. Naam Asaf Dushman ke. So it is the outside, it is the Mughal, it is the British. The Goras are bad, the Mughals are bad. And our kings and queens have our interest at heart. The reason why this narrative persists is because for the longest time when the Rajgons were in power, they followed a kind of very decentralized federal structure. Let me talk about Durgawati herself. She had 52 garha. Garha is like a fort district. So she had about 52 gars under her control. But these gars, most of them, had their own little structure, and her control was limited to the fact that when she went to battle, they would come and give her men and arms. So it was like a very decentralized nature. The army and the actual law and administration of those garhas was handled by the local Raja or Rai. And they used to call themselves either Raja or Rai. But they were under the Rajgond monarchs of the day, whoever the Rajgond monarch was. Now, in Durgawati's case, she had about 23,000 villages which were directly under her. Even these, half of them were more or less controlled federally by the Gar districts. So you can imagine that unlike the Mughal structure, which was centralized, and there was a central authority, which was the imperial command, who would send Jagirdars to various corners of the kingdom. This was not like that. This was a hereditary post, including down to the villages. So you will say that, say for instance, a Gar district will have 1,000 villages. Now in the village, the Patwari would be your unit of law and order. And that role was also hereditary. So you had a very decentralized hereditary structure, and matters of law and order would come to the queen only when they had not been settled by the local Patwari or the local Raja. Very, very federal. Now, what this means is that the people obviously loved the structure because it gave them a lot of freedom. But what it means is militarily, in medieval terms, this was a disaster. It was a complete disaster. Why was it a disaster? Because The queen's army, therefore, she had to depend on her 52 Garha Rajas to send her soldiers. Those soldiers were armed, trained by the respective Garha Rajas, which means they were not of uniform quality. Many of them were not well trained. And how good they were in battle depended on how good a commander that Garha Raja was. Some of them were very good, some of them were not so good. So the army that she had at her disposal was not uniformly trained, not uniformly armed, and not of uniform quality. And that affected the final consequence of the last battle in her life.
But having said that, it's true that she talked about the 50 plus skirmishes she had with the border districts. So there's a very good description of the battle she fought with Baz Bahadur and the strategies she used in order to neutralize the Baz Bahadur's advantages. So that's a very interesting part of the book. Now let's talk about the queen a little bit. You know, you're a woman, I'm a woman, she's a goddess. To me, she is a goddess. You know, these ancient monarchs, not ancient actually, the Hindu monarchs, they had such a beautiful, unself-conscious, spontaneous relationship with dharma. So you had an entire aspect of their life gone in building temples, and the entire ecological and economic, spin-offs that come off the temple building, and the respect for the environment. You know, if you do not feed your kingdom, then your kingdom is sad. So talk to us a little bit about this lady in her 15 years, the amount she took care. Because my sister is a farmer, she'll tell you how deep the water tables are going down in the farm, and and how we need to conserve water. Here is a lady who made catchment ponds, not one, not two. So tell us a little bit about this relationship. She had tribal subjects. Their relationship with the forest was very, very important. They grew wheat, they exported wheat. It was a country that never went hungry. So tell us about these two aspects of a monarch. You know, this thing about the temple, the deity, how important and central it was to everybody, you know. And also this thing about something as crucial as water. We don't realize how important these systems are, you know.
So before I start off answering this question, just want to tell you that you must be wondering why I'm looking like the sun, wearing a yellow sari. I wear it in honor of Rani Durgawati. To this day, if you go to her kingdom, what was her kingdom, the tribal Gonds wear yellow in her honor. They will wear yellow turban, yellow dhoti, and yellow saris on special occasions, including on the 24th of June every year, which is celebrated as Balidan Divas, which is her, her sacrifice day. But coming to Rani Durgawati, she was such an exceptional monarch because she was known as the Tal Talao Rani. She excavated 64 water bodies, 64. And she had lakes named after pretty much anyone, including, her husband, her father-in-law, her son. There was Bal Sagar, which
elephant.
And the elephant, yeah, Hatital. So she had a favorite elephant who was like a son to her, who went to battle with her and died for her. So there was a Tal Talao named after him, Hatital. Then she had Tal Talaos named after the famous people, her critical people in her court, including some of her famous generals. So there were 64 Tal Talaos that she excavated, and the whole point was that she was determined to make sure that no one went thirsty in her kingdom. Now remember, this part of India is not necessarily a very richly rain-fed part, so having a monarch who looks after your water needs is a very, very critical part of the prosperity of that kingdom. So one of the reasons why Gara became became a grain bowl and became rich and all that was because Durgawati herself was totally committed to building tanks and building temples. These were the twin responsibilities of the Rani. There are several temples that are connected with her name. And interestingly, and here I want to make that distinction, I would like to give the examples of two temples. Now, the first is a Sharda Mata Mandir. Sharda Mata Mandir in near Madan Mahal, which used to be one of her palaces in Jabalpur. You can go and see it. It's a beautiful temple. And if you go to that temple is directly associated with Rani Durgawati. She was the one who consecrated that temple. And there is a very interesting ritual that happens in the temple. I don't want to give it away. You can read the book and see what it is. That ritual was started by her. And for the last 460 odd years, every year, people go to that temple to perform that ritual, connected to her name. So you have Sharda Mata Mandir on the one hand. Then on the banks of the Narmada, you have a Shiv temple that she built. Now, obviously, the current structure, if you go and see it, you'll say that it is fairly modern, must be about, it says 60, 70 years old, but this temple was rebuilt several times over the years. So, and of course, she being a Chandel Rajput, she was a Chandel Rajput, so her Kula Devi was Manaiya Devi. And there is a Manaiya Devi Mandir also in Kalinjar Fort. Although Kalinjar was not her patrimony, but it was, she was a princess of Rath Mahova, but they were part of the Chandel line. So what I'm saying is that if you look at what her responsibilities are, and again, there are contemporary references. There is a book that she had commissioned during her reign called Prastab Ratnakar. Now, Prastab Ratnakar talks about her duties, her sacred duties, and we see how much time she spent in consecrating temples, in doing yagyas, in various other, sacred duties that she had, and not just her husband Dalpati, as long as he was alive, her father-in-law Sangram Shah. So they clearly took their duties, these twin duties of the sacred duties and the secular duties. They were equally important, and she took them very seriously.
Incidentally, I'm wearing a Maheshwari in honor of Ahilyabai Holkar that I would like to talk about with Vikram later on in the day. This is just to honor two ladies and the two things that we wear. Now, with regard to Durgawati, let's talk about, I don't want to use the word feminist, but she was a woman. She commanded the respect of her people. She was a widow. Yes. And it's not just Hindus. Yes. So can you just talk about what it must have been in her capacity to actually win the loyalty of no less than Afghans? Yes. And what must have been the strategic mind of this lady in her time to not only, we have such weird notions about a widow in India, and we're so, like I tell my students, one would think if you read British accounts that, every Bengali woman whose husband died had to, jump into a fire. I mean, that's the kind of ridiculous, legacy we bear about the widow in India. And yet, Durgawati, can you just, do justice to her in that aspect? I don't want to use the word feminist.
Okay. She was, so first Durgawati in many ways was a very unusual monarch. And we were just talking about Akbar just a couple of minutes back. And today when we look at Akbar, we say he was a very unusual medieval monarch in the sense that he was tolerant of all religions. And we have his comments about himself that I'm deeply ashamed of what I used to be before. He was by no means the only one, because if we look at Durgawati, we find that there is a very interesting episode where she actually defeats the Afghans in battle, the Miana Afghans. The Miana Afghans used to be in the Elichpur area along the banks of the Son River. So these Miana Afghans, after Islam Shah Suri was the Suris were defeated and the Mughals came back to power. The Miana Afghans went around that area fomenting trouble. They were just, loots, plain and simple looting. What Durgawati did was she defeated them and defeated them in so definitively that they never ever molested her kingdom again. Not only that, a lot of them went and joined Durgawati. So the interesting thing is you find that there are these Afghan generals like Shams Khan Miana, Mubarak Khan, all these people, and there are a whole lot of them. There are like 6, 7 of them whose names have survived to this day, who all of them lost their lives fighting for her in the final battle. So this shows you that they respected this lady enough. First, they are defeated by her, and she earns their respect. And till the end of their days, they followed her to battle and gave their lives for her. So clearly, for a monarch to include defeated Muslims, generals into her army means that, she had a very clear idea of what tolerance meant. And that is something that was by no means peculiar only to the Mughal court, number one. Number two is that, if we look at the way she has, by the way, there are Tal Talaus also dedicated to some of these Muslim generals, by the way. So the whole point I'm trying to make here is that the monarchs of medieval India, many of them followed a similar routine, most of them. And these people, the Muslim generals who were included into court, both secular and military, were promoted according to their capabilities. There was no religious angle involved in that at all. Firstly, when it comes to feminism, the reason why I say that she is an utterly modern medieval queen is because in every decision she takes in her life, she pushes the envelope. Remember, she is a Chandel princess. This is a very iconic Rajput bloodline, right? What does she do? Her father organizes a Swayamvar. She runs away and marries a tribal Gond prince. Right? So this is an intercaste marriage. So unusual that there are only 2 examples of intercaste marriages in the entire 400 years of Rajgond history. Only 2. The first is Durgawati, the other one is when dynasty founder Yadurai married a Gond princess called Ratnavali. Only 2 examples. So she goes against tradition, marries the man that she loves. All right? When he dies, she doesn't jump into the sati fire. She says, I will rule. My son will be king, I will be regent. And she fobs off this brother-in-law out of Garha. He skulks in, in another kingdom called Chanda. And he skulks there till she's dead. He never comes back. And then, if we look at, again, we go back to Ramnagar inscription. It is very clear that the kingdom is ruled and the power structure is controlled by the queen. She's not a puppet queen. She's taking all her decisions herself, okay? And right till the very end, when there is a beautiful passage, and again, it's very interesting that Abul Fazl being Akbar's hagiographer, and Akbar is her enemy. So she is Akbar's enemy, therefore Akbar is his master, therefore she needs to be demonized, which he does. He does demonize her. But he treats her with unusual amount of respect. Throughout the account that he gives of her, he keeps talking about her nobility, talks about her valor, talks about the fact that she never backs down. No matter how much the Mughals are bullying her, she is not going to blink. And this earns her respect from somebody like Abul Fazl, who records it in the Akbarnama, right? So even there, right till the very end, she is saying, my dharma comes first. Death before dishonor. I am not going to back down to bullying. I am not going to allow these people to run riot. I will face them in battle. I will take them on. And this is amazing strength. I mean, it gives me goose pimples every time I think about it, because all the men around her really let her down. If she was defeated in the final battle, it was because the men around her let her down.
In fact, that was going to be my next and my last question. I'll leave the audience 10 minutes to ask theirs. When you have this graphic description of the battle, and then it's very disturbing and very disheartening, because as you said, the first day she was victorious. And she implored her generals to take proactive measures so as to, neutralize the artillery that Asaf Khan had, which she didn't. But then, they don't listen to her. So that's where she's let down. And sure enough, the artillery is there the next morning and puts her at a disadvantage. But, you know, it is the battle scene with the description that hit me so badly, and I've gone on record to say that I've wept reading your book. You know, and you talk about a picture that has been painted that depicts this scene, you know, where she's on her elephant, she's wounded at the moment when the arrow actually strikes her. And you have the, you know, the sort of, the control of the battle sort of disentangles and dismantles around her, and she knows that there's nothing she can do about it. Now, if there is a picture, why is it not in your book?
Thank you for asking this. So there is a picture. There is a very evocative picture in the Akbarnama, which documents this particular moment when the queen has been hit by an arrow, and Abul Fazl describes it also. One arrow at the temple, one at the neck, and she pulls it out, but the arrowhead remains. So she's bleeding profusely. And this picture is right now sitting in the Victoria and Albert Museum as part of the Akbarnama papers in UK. The reason it was not included in this book, despite our best efforts, is because the V&A asked for £300 for it. So first, they steal our stuff, and then they get us to pay to use what was ours to begin with. That's nice, right? It's a nice business plan. But what I would really want is for the government of India to take this up so that whatever of ours is sitting in British museums should at least be allowed to be used by scholars free of cost. So I couldn't pay £300 for this. And I'm really sorry, I couldn't pay, but that picture is there. If you want, please Google it, you'll see the picture. Now this picture is very beautiful because you see it's a tableau. If you see the Akbarnama pictures, they are tableaus. So this picture is a tableau. And Rani Durgawati is right at the bottom left-hand corner of the picture. And we see her wounded, and we see the elephant is also wounded. Sarman, the elephant, is wounded, is very badly wounded, is bleeding. And we see all these Mughal soldiers with their helmets and the curved swords who are swarming the picture. So in this picture, she is not center stage. She is not center stage. She is in a corner. And like what has happened to her in post-independence year, she has become a footnote in her own story. But the good news is, this picture, you see this? This is almost near contemporary portrait of hers. This picture is hanging in the Chennai Museum. And the lovely, lovely authorities in the Chennai Museum allowed us to use it for free. So if you want to see what she looks like, you can go take a look at her in Chennai Museum.
So the last point before the audience asks the question is that she fought that last battle, and she was determined to preserve actually her body from dishonor. But you make a very disturbing, veiled quote from the other chronicler of Akbar's time. And actually when I read that line, that she'd rather die than be defiled, I immediately said, you never know with this enemy. You know, they can desecrate a dead body. But can you just end with what you think seems to be a veiled reference to precisely that?
So this is the most disturbing part. Okay. This is the most disturbing part of Rani Durgawati's story. She killed herself because when she realized that escape was not an option anymore. There was just no way she could get out. And as a result, she killed herself. The Gonds believe that her elephant also died, but he covered her body with his own, which may well be true. But Mughal chroniclers like Badauni, from their references, it becomes fairly obvious that her body was desecrated. And Gond folk tales and folk songs also mention this very clearly, that apna tan bachao ma. You know, so she is looking to protect her feminine form, even in death. So this is how a great warrior and a woman who really did not do anything at all politically to cross the Mughals. Unlike the Sisodias, she didn't have a history with them at all. She was just plundered, looted, killed, desecrated, simply because she was a woman and in charge of a rich kingdom. That's it.
Questions? Keep them short and no back and forth.
That was a great session. Thank you so much. So my question is that, earlier in your speech you said we learn more about the wars that we lost. And I seem to find this very systematic narrative in the history that I was taught in school, that, we lost more wars than we won. India never attacked another country, and this continued to be the prime focus of how we learned the freedom struggle as well, where submissive and peace seem to be.
You have to come to your point, please. We don't have the time.
Yeah. So, do you think that this was done to change the perception of India to be very defenseless, which has led to our generation being very self-loathing Indians?
Yeah.
And the like?
Absolutely, I totally agree, because I think the whole point of picking and cherry picking battles from our past only to show how valiantly we fought and lost sort of reiterates this point that we were never a warrior class, never meant to, win battles. We were just nice people. We even got our independence through, non-violent means, quite forgetting the work that was done by others who have been othered in the narrative. So yes, absolutely right.
Congratulations, Nandini, for a brilliant talk and a brilliant book. I just don't have a question, but I just want to add something to what you said. You talked about intercaste marriages. I want to say marriages were always intercaste, especially among rulers. And I want to give the example of the Satavahana dynasty, which ruled in that area, South India, almost 1,000 years before Rani Durgawati. The Satavahanas were Brahmins, and they married a Shaka princess. Shaka were for Malechas, if you want to call that. And they also married Naga princesses. Yes. So, we have to re-look at our past when we talk about these intercaste marriages. They were the norm, not the exception. But congratulations on a brilliant talk.
Thank you, Meenakshi ji. Coming from you, that's high praise. And I just want to say the Naga princess, Chandragupta Vikramaditya also had, Kuber Naga was his second wife, who was a Naga princess. There are examples. Yes. Lichavi is also Samudragupta's mother.
One more question?
Yes, we have 1 more minute. Anybody?
Okay. Yeah, there is a question.
Brilliant story, thank you very much. I'm from Sangha, and in Ekatmata Strotra, we have a mention of Rani Durgawati. Nevertheless, we didn't know much about her. But my question to you is, now the book is released, how you percolate this message to the younger generations who are constantly fed with the information that is not ours?
I hope that's the reason why I have written this book. I always say I am not a historian. I am a journalist. I am only reporting a story that happened 460 years ago. So I have written this like a journalistic account. It is easy to read, it is pacey, and I just want to make it very easily understandable, relatable, so that young people will be able to read it, enjoy it. Yesterday, I was at the Times Lit Fest. I was a bunch of kids, my daughter's age, 15, 16 years old. They walked up and they said, "Ma'am, why don't history books, why are they so boring? Why can't we have stories?" But the word history includes the word story in it. We have to tell them as stories, so kids will enjoy them.
So well done, Nandini. Thank you very much for writing this book. I did not imagine that it would impact me so much, and really, to bring forward a heroine like her, in all of our hearts. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.